Welcome to USC Rossier's Leadership Month and today's session, Lunch with Leaders, Women in Leadership. Before we begin, I would like to review the process for submitting a question for our panelists. Please type your question in the Q&A box that can be accessed by clicking on the Q&A icon located at the bottom of your screen. We have reserved time towards the end of today's session for your questions and hope to get to as many as possible. We also received a number of questions via the registration form and have tried to incorporate as many of them as possible into our structured Q&A at the beginning of the session. If you are planning to share your experience at today's sessions on social media, we encourage you to include the Leadership Month hashtag #RossierLeads, which appears at the top of the screen. Lastly, please note a recording of this webinar will be available in the next few days and a link will be sent via email. And now I would like to introduce our moderator. Mary McNeil earned her master's degree in 1980 and PhD in 1996 from USC Rossier. She currently serves as Superintendent of Needles Unified School District located on the California, Nevada, and Arizona border. At this point, I will turn the session over to you, Mary.
Thank you, Matt. Very excited to be here today. I think we have a wonderful program planned for all of us. I would like to introduce our panelists today. First, I'd like to introduce Cheryl Marshall, who has an EdD 2001. Cheryl is the Chancellor, North Orange County Community College District. Welcome, Cheryl. I would like to introduce next Melissa Moore, who has an EdD 2014, Superintendent of the El Segundo Unified School District. And I'd also like to introduce Georgia Steele, who has an EdD 2019, and Georgia is the Chief Performance Officer of the Georgia Department of Revenue. Welcome to our panelists today. So to begin our panel discussion today, we have identified some questions that I believe will be of interest to all of us. So I'd like to start our discussion off by asking each of you to provide some more background on your career path that led to your current role. Cheryl, would you please start our discussion?
Thank you, Mary. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you. Thank you for joining us. I'll start by saying I have a somewhat non-traditional career path, but that is becoming more the norm in education these days. So I actually started in private industry, doing career counseling and training and organizational development practitioner. And I never knew how valuable all of those skills would become. So that's one lesson I hope you'll get from today as we learn things all along the way. My trajectory changed when I met the department chair in the Management and Human Resources Department at Cal Poly Pomona. And she invited me to become an adjunct instructor. And I took her up on that invitation and I just fell in love with teaching. So I spent the next 7 years as a freeway flyer. I think I taught at 6 different colleges and universities and still continue to do training and OD work on the side during that period. My community college career actually started at Mount San Antonio College. I was finishing up my doctorate and didn't want to drive around anymore. So it was a great opportunity. I thought that would be great for a couple of years and that would get me through my doctoral program. But I ended up staying at Mount SAC for 8 years, working on the grant and becoming Director of Professional Development and finally Assistant Dean of Business at Mount SAC. It was during that time that a little college out in Yucaipa called Crafton Hills College needed some help with some strategic planning. So a colleague of mine invited me to join her in helping them develop their educational master plan. And that's another lesson from today is you never know what kinds of opportunities will come along that will end up resulting in a career change or a job change. So worked with them for about 18 months in developing their strategic plan. And then they invited me to apply for their vice president of instruction. And, you know, my first thought was, who, me? But I ended up applying and getting the job. And I spent 9 years at Crafton Hills College, 5 of those as vice president and then 4 years as president. And then a mentor encouraged me to apply for the chancellor job at North Orange. And I had the same reaction. Are you talking about me? And so, you know, you never are completely ready for the next step, but I took the plunge and applied for the chancellor position. And I've just completed 4 years as the chancellor of North Orange County Community College District and starting my 5th year. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Melissa, if you'd like to tell us about your pathway.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. As a young child, I always wanted to go into education, and I was one of those little girls that wanted to be that teacher. And so it's interesting to me that today I sit here as a superintendent entering my 7th year. If you take a look at the research for all the women in the audience, it clearly shows men have a much more straightforward and direct path. You will often hear men in entry-level administrative courses you take say, oh, I want to be the superintendent someday. Whereas none of us as women do that. So I was one of those. I never had anticipated ever being a superintendent. I was an elementary teacher, an elementary assistant principal, a middle school assistant principal, a middle school principal, elementary principal, assistant superintendent of human resources, and superintendent. And I have to say, it was women along the way that encouraged me, just as Cheryl mentioned. You have that who me moment. And it wasn't until I became a 50-something that I really said, I can do that job. So anyway, that's my path. And like I said, I'm entering my 7th year here in El Segundo, and I'm a proud superintendent of a district of about 3,500. Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Melissa. And Georgia, if you would tell us about your career pathway, please.
So not in education, I'm in public service, but I fell in love with public service through taking calls as a call center agent with the New York City 311 call center, which I believe is the largest non-emergency call center in the country. And really just, you know, a seed that was planted through Mayor Mike Bloomberg about taking that private sector approach to customer service and efficiencies and bringing that to city government. And I think that has helped me to really move forward in my career through different agencies. So from New York City 311, I transitioned to the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission in different, you know, roles there, leaving there in my last role as the Assistant Commissioner of Licensing and Standards. So if you have ever had the wonderful and life-changing opportunity to sit in the back of a yellow cab in New York City, you are more than welcome. But I moved from New York and moved to Atlanta to take on the role as Assistant Director for the Motor Vehicles Division here at the Department of Revenue. So just to give context to the scope of that role, we're the 8th largest registration state in the country. We have 10.2 million vehicles registered in our state. So, you know, the city girl, you know, moves to an area that is very different here in the South. 2 years after taking on that role, I was promoted to Director. And 8 months ago, I was asked to take on the role as Chief Performance Officer for our organization. So this is a new role. I was appointed by our commissioner, and in essence, to really move the needle on our performance, looking at our efficiency and heighten, you know, customer service and awareness.
Thank you, Georgia. And now I'd like to ask Cheryl to consider what specific challenges has recent events like the pandemic and issues around racial equity raised for women leaders.
I thought a lot about this and the differences for women leaders versus all of us as leaders. And so I'm going to differentiate between what we are all facing and the thing that I think we face as women. To me, the biggest challenge that we have faced as women leaders is that some, but not all, don't think that we can make tough decisions. And sometimes our credibility is lacking in the eyes of some. So I think that's the biggest challenge that we have faced as women leaders in these roles, trying to deal with, you know, uncharted territory, that's for sure. And then there's 3 things that I want all of us to think about and encourage all of the participants to think about as leaders. The first is, with this pandemic in particular, we need to balance the need to gather information with being decisive. With the pandemic in particular, especially early on, I mean, the information changes still today. It seems like it changes every single day. And sometimes we get conflicting information. So trying to gather enough information, but also knowing when it's time to just make a decision and then having to adjust. And so we need to be flexible in how we continue to plan and handle and respond to the pandemic. We are never going to have all the information that we need. So I think it's good just to know when to pull the trigger and make a decision and move on. The second point is that I think we need to keep focus on our students, those of us who are in education. Right now, we are trying to balance meeting their educational goals with keeping them safe. Something that has struck me during this past few months is how important it is to stay connected with our students and with each other, and to help them remain engaged. I had one faculty member tell me the other day that she actually has done individual check-ins with her students, sets up meetings with them just to check in and see how they're doing. And I know our students miss being on campus. So as we try to make decisions about, face-to-face versus online, I think we need to be intentional about how we are going to stay connected with the students and keep them engaged with their education and with each other. And the third point is I think we need to really be courageous in dealing with social justice and equity issues. This is a time when we need to figure out what our specific role is, but because of the heightened awareness, this is a great opportunity for us to take some steps forward. We know that this is a difficult conversation to have. So I think we need to really facilitate these discussions and build our skills in facilitating these discussions. It's also a time for us to self-reflect. What biases do I have that maybe I haven't addressed? What unconscious biases do I have that might need to be explored and addressed? So those are some of the challenges that I think we face as leaders during this pandemic and social unrest.
Thank you, Cheryl. Melissa, could you talk a little bit about some pitfalls that women face on their leadership journey that could be avoided? One second. Oh, there you go.
In the public schools have been fruitful for women. So if you take a look at the teaching force, for example, we're more than 75% that go into education are women. But yet when we get to the top seat, the superintendent seat, we have still in 2018, 2019, less than 25% of us are here. And that's a problem. That is really a problem. Some of the pitfalls are self-imposed deterrents that women do. If we take a look at what the demands of the job are, you have a 50 or 60-hour week. In many times you are the mother, you might be the spouse, you might be a caregiver. So you have to balance your demands of the position, night meetings, sporting events, community events, touring schools, being in classrooms, solving problems, working with your school board. So when we look at the superintendency, specifically women have identified just a few things as balancing home and work, child rearing, whether or not you'd relocate. Georgia mentioned she relocated from New York to Atlanta, and that's a big step. I located as well, 90 miles to take this position. One of the things that has really been enlightening to me as of late is I've started reading How Women Rise. And in this book, it talks about 12 habits that women impose on themselves. So I wanted to share just two little ones that have really spoken to me. So one of the things that they talk about in the book is putting your job before your career. So guilty as charged. I definitely have done that. I spent over 25 years in Yucaipa, Calamasa, and I was a teacher there, an assistant principal, and a lot of my career was there, upwards to assistant superintendent of human resources. I spent 14 years as a principal. I spent 7 years as an assistant superintendent because I love the people. I love my job. I love making a difference, but I'm not looking at it as a career. I stayed too long. I stayed too long, and if I had been another gender, I would not have done that. So I think keeping in mind, putting your job before your career, that would definitely be one.
Thank you, Melissa. I think we can all learn from that. And could you hold the book up just one more time so we could all take note? Thank you. Great, thank you very much. Now I'd like to ask Georgia to speak to how do you bring attention to instances of bias and discrimination in the workplace while navigating any risks associated with being the individual that is raising these issues?
So I will say moving from New York to Atlanta certainly came with some culture shock. And I'm used to being either the first or the only person in a room or a committee. So, you know, first person of color in a role, or the youngest person in the role, or the only female in the room. So I'm sure there are other people who can, you know, speak to or have had instances where they've been in situations where there's either, you know, expressed or, you know, bias or discrimination that is taking place around them. One thing that I've kind of held dear when it comes to that, and I really try to think about, is playing chess and not checkers when I am faced with instances or situations. And when I say that, what I mean is really just thinking through the process, not just what's happening in that very moment, but being strategic with my actions. Because I don't want for my actions to harm me in the long run or harm, you know, what the long-term best intention is. One situation comes to mind. This one is one that I speak on at times. So I had some legislation that we, as an organization, we're trying to push forward. And so I'm, you know, in this room with an elected official who is high on the committee that will help to support the legislation. And I'm passionately speaking about why this is in the best interest of our, you know, our organization in terms of moving this forward, and also for the state. So, you know, I'm there with the data, the facts, the, you know, bullet points, and going through it, talking for about 10 minutes. So just to give context, the youngest person in the room, only female, only person of color. There are 3 Caucasian men in the room. So there is the person who's on the committee, my boss, and then one of our managing attorneys is there. So they're sitting next to me, but I'm speaking, and I'm you know, moving things forward and talking about why we need to do this. So I feel like I've really sold it, right? And everyone's in. He should be in, because I've shared everything. I've talked about how passionate I am about this and how important it needs to be. And he starts off his response with "darling." And I froze. And in that moment, in my mind, I'm trying to think, how do I respond to this? Because especially as a Northerner, people don't say darling. And then before our meeting even started, when he was speaking to my boss, he referred to him by first name. When he was speaking to the attorney, he spoke to him by first name. But somehow, after I have come out with all this data and this information, which I have researched and presented, you know, and here we are, and this man calls me darling. And when I was speaking to him, I was referring to him by his title and last name. And so I'm sitting there, and I think my boss realized, you know, either a change in my body language or whatever it was, but he said, what Director Steele is saying is, and he summarized what I had talked about for about the last 10 or 15 minutes. And of course, my emotions are high. So in my mind, I'm thinking, so he's sitting here next to me trying to mansplain what I just clearly said. So there's something now on top of the emotions that I'm already feeling, because now I'm feeling like there's this sense of, you know, microaggression taking place between myself and this, you know, elected official who is now trying to diminish me as just darling in this room. But I had to take the time to think through what was happening. And that's when I realized, and this is something that I think is important for someone to take away from this, is my boss was not trying to explain what I had said. He was bringing respect back into the room for me by saying Director Steele, so that the elected official could still understand, one, reminder of my name, which is not hard to remember because my name is also that of our state, but making sure that the respect was in the room for me. So I think, you know, sometimes it feels like the natural reaction is to move and just to do something, but I think and that's why I say chess, not checkers, because checkers, you're just moving a piece. In chess, you're really thinking about strategically what the next step needed to be. And in that case, it wasn't mine or my step to do, it was my boss's opportunity to position me correctly so that respect could come back into the room. So I would say certainly take the time to really think through it and think about who your allies are. Think about, you know, the relationships that you build, because there are people who will advocate for you, who will speak on your behalf, who can help to change things, but sometimes they need an opportunity to get to know you in a way that they understand when something is wrong. Because I think the relationship I had with my boss is what gave him, you know, one, he heard it, but he also realized that something about me in terms of my presence and just my demeanor changed, and realized that I was offended by what had happened, and he jumped in when he needed to. So I think certainly just taking that into context and keeping that in mind is important.
Yeah, Mary, I'd like to add to that too. I think I really appreciate what Georgia is saying, that this gentleman was a champion for her. And I think as women, we need to be champions for one another. Many times we'll look at another woman in the room as competition, and we need to look at them as an ally, and we need to embrace the fact that we are all rising together and we are stronger together. And so I just really want to say that I think this example of being a champion for other women, taking time to coach, to be a thought partner, and to support other women to be their best self and achieve their dreams is so, so important to combat this issue.
Cheryl, would you like to add anything from your perspective?
What I want to add is don't let the bullies keep you down. Don't let the people who are biased against you or do want you down from doing the work that needs to be done, from doing the right thing, from serving your students to serving your communities. You know, we have to have enough resiliency and fortitude to stand up to situations that we see that are not right.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Melissa to talk about the role that her doctoral degree played in her career. And I'll ask the other panelists to address this as well. Specifically as a woman leader, how did it make a difference, or did it?
Yeah, I definitely feel it made a difference. The female superintendents of today are more likely to be academically accomplished and possess a doctoral degree in educational administration than their male counterparts. So I personally believe this to be true. And so as a 50-something, I got this harebrained idea that I'm going back to school. I finished my master's in the 80s, people. So I had been back in school for quite some time. So I got this idea and I was like, I need to do this. This is my goal. And having been in one school district for a long time, 25 years, I needed to build my network. I needed to find people with like thinking and like goals. So I went ahead and I spoke to my kids, and, you know, they were, you know, I think my oldest was about 17 at the time, or my youngest, I should say. My others were launched into adulthood, 3 sons. And they supported me, and they're like, you go, Mom, you go, and you go do you, and we support you. And so I took it on, and I can't tell you how it was so, so important in my career. So I think when you entered the doctoral program, I had an option of being assigned a mentor. So one of the things that they talked about in the book was overvaluing expertise, okay? So as women, once again, we try to master every detail of your current job and become the expert, like more than you need to, okay? More than you need to. So I was a principal for 14 years because I loved it. I loved working with my team. I got a lot of affirmation and validation from the people that I worked with. I went after, we were distinguished school. I had a state teacher of the year. We had award here, award there. Then I went to assistant superintendent of human resources. Once again, I was the state HR Administrator of the Year for AXA. I, was there for 7 years. Once again, the expertise was like a drill down. So I go in and I talk to my mentor, and she says, Melissa, what are you going to do your doctorate on? What's your dissertation? And I go with teacher evaluation. Why? Because I'm an assistant sup of HR. And here she is, a 30-something, and she looked at me and she said, no, you're not. She said, you need to get yourself in rooms with superintendents and school board members. You want to be a superintendent, don't you? And I said, yes, I do. And she says, then you're not doing teacher evaluation. You're going to work on superintendent and school board. So my dissertation was strategies successful superintendents and boards of education employ that result in increased student achievement. This one discussion with another young female leader who's a Rossier a graduate as well, was a catalyst for me to be able to get this job. I use this dissertation on a daily basis in my work. I cannot tell you enough. The work that you do in your dissertation is thoughtful, it's meaningful, and it takes what you think is your intuition into true foundational pedagogy that you use on a day-to-day basis. So fight on, look at USC's program.
Cheryl or Georgia, would you like to comment as well?
Want to go, Georgia?
Sure. So I'll speak to the journey to graduation was interesting. So I'm a single parent running a pretty major operation here in Georgia, and there have been times within that process or within the journey that I said, this is just not for me. And the people who pulled me from the edge or pulled me down were people who I was in my cohort with, because it's not just you're taking class, you see people on screen and that's it. You build relationships, and those individuals push you, and they know the things that you're able to do, or they know your dreams and aspirations, because you're having these conversations and building these relationships as you're going through these courses together. So at times, there are doctoral programs that, people go through in other schools where you're just kind of in this little balloon by yourself. You're in this own little world. The Rossier program doesn't allow for that. You're doing it as a family. So if there's someone whose assignment is late, you can tell, because you know who usually submits at the very last minute, their assignment, et cetera. And so if someone is struggling, you can tell when something is different about them. And we all kind of jump in and help each other grow. I think that journey is what helps to make us better. It helps to refine us. And so when you do finally achieve that, the doctorate, and you have that paper, it means so much more, because it's not just the paper, it's now the relationships that you've built. It's having individuals that, as you look to branch off into different things, you can reach out to. We have, people who are focused on diversity and inclusion, and I can make a phone call and say, listen, I think we're having a challenge in our organization. What are your thoughts on this? And that's someone whose focus was on that area. For me, in terms of my professional growth, I will say this, and this is just a tongue-in-cheek statement. Anytime someone says to me, do I call you Dr. Steele or Georgia? I said, as long as you're not an elected official, you can call me Georgia. Because now the title, whenever I deal with an elected official, it is always Dr. Steele. You will use my title. But in all seriousness, it really allowed for me to build relationships and be more intentional in how I develop those relationships, because I understand in a long-term scope how that helps me as an individual to grow, and me imparting in someone else how it helps them to grow as well.
I would add that the cohort and the network that you build in the USC education doctoral programs are just marvelous. I still have colleagues. I mean, I got mine 20 years ago, and I still have colleagues and friends from my cohort. So it's just wonderful. And the other two things that I would add is that I really believed it changed my perspective. It helped me to become a strategic thinker. Again, even though it's been 20 years, I still use the concepts and principles and some of the things that I learned in my doctoral program every single day. So the things about pedagogy and motivation and organizational systems, all of those things obviously are critical to me in a senior leadership role. And I do believe that having the doctoral degree opens doors. It definitely makes you more competitive in the job market. There are many positions today where it is expected for you to have the doctoral degree. So not only does it make you a better thinker, a better performer, but it helps to open doors.
Thank you. I'd like to ask our panel now the question that women leaders are often scrutinized more than men when it comes to navigating work-life balance issues. We talked a little bit about that today. What has been your experience and what advice can you offer? Cheryl, would you like to start?
Thank you. Let me say that I'm still working on this. And as was mentioned earlier, I mean, these jobs are basically 50 to 60 hours a week, sometimes more. There's just no getting around that. So it's something that I have to be intentional about. And sometimes I fail at it, quite frankly. So I'm still learning on this one. In my experience for my life, the two biggest challenges were when my kids were little. I started my doctoral program when my kids were 2 and 4. And I was, teaching and consulting. So it was quite a challenge. It was quite a strain on my family. It's one of the few regrets I have is that I didn't spend more time with my kids when they were little. It certainly got better as they became more independent and grew up. So for all of you out there with little ones, just know that you can get through it and it does get better. But I know when they were little, I think that was even harder than when they were teenagers. And it was trying to find that balance. The other thing is for those of us who have aging parents, I would say that's another major challenge. So, you have it at both ends. You have it when your family is young. And then as we have our parents age, that creates quite a few demands on us. And you need to find a way to find some sort of balance and be able to be there for your parents and their needs in their final days. As far as advice, I think one, you need a support system, and that needs to be a combination of family and friends and competent child care providers. And they are not always easy to find. I've had my share of ones that didn't work out so well, but you need all of that because you can't rely on any one individual or family consistently. So you need a network of folks that you can rely on. Take advantage of traveling with your family or your partner or spouse when you have conferences or when you're going on a work trip. This is something that worked out for me when my kids were younger. I had one role where I was traveling around the state, and so we would turn them into little mini vacations, and it was a lot of fun and allowed me to find that balance with my family and still get some work done. Give yourself permission to move at your pace through your career. For those of us who do decide to have families, it's okay to not take the next advancement if it's not time. If you can't maintain that balance in your life and you have family commitments, don't beat yourself up because a job opportunity comes along that you're not ready for because of other demands on your life. So please give yourself permission to move at a pace that works for you and your life. And the last two is, and I'm still working on being intentional on this one, but you do have to take care of yourself. So do some things that are good for you. Give yourself some alone time. And realize that it's not splurging when you are doing something that is good for you and helps you maintain your energy. And my last piece of advice is you need to have some fun. You need to do things that are fun for you. One of my things that I enjoy most, and I'm missing my shopping trips because of this pandemic, but I have what I call my retail therapy crew. And we, twice a year, we start in the shoe department at Macy's, and we spend the entire day and we try to go to different malls and make it a fun day and, have lunch and have dinner, and there might be some adult beverages involved. So it's something that's really fun that I enjoy. And I try to do other things like that re-energize me and keep me grounded.
Mary, I'd like to add to this one. One of the habits also in the book outlined is too much. And too much refers to a woman who is too strong or too intense. And it could be that you're too emotional, or you use too many words, or there's too much disclosure. So you really need to be intentional and tempered in your approach as a professional. And I always tell our educators, you know, when you're in an educational arena, your conduct has to be above reproach, beyond reproach, right? So I'm sorry, but your appearance is scrutinized. I make it a point to look good, and you know, I think it's important that you project what you expect. And so I do dress as a professional. I make sure that there's nothing to question. That box is checked for somebody because I want them to hear what I'm saying and not, you know, oh, wow, our shoes look really dirty. I mean, you know, let's really focus on what the word is here. But there have been times in my career, frankly, where I have had somebody tell me I need to smile more. I've had someone say I need to kind of temper my voice. I obviously get a little animated. I get passionate about the things I believe in. And I've actually had a male counterpart tell me to kind of dial it back. And so that was really, really hard to hear, So I try to have a real keen awareness. I also really try to help our newer administrators who are women to just become more self-conscious of something they might be doing on an unconscious level, so that they can determine whether or not they need to self-correct. But I do think I think it's important that I demonstrate empathy, a can-do attitude, a focus on children. And I'm going to tell you right now, in these types of leadership roles, whether it's public sector or at the higher ed level or in K-12, you have got to have a strong moral compass, because in these times, if you don't know who you are and are confident in what you bring to the table, and that you have additive value, and that you are making a difference in the lives of others, then this is not the role for you. So just have confidence, hold your head high, and be your true self.
So Melissa, you made a great point about knowing who you are. And for a while, that's something that I struggled with when I was early in my career. So I used to wear slacks, button shirts, and had my hair in a ponytail. And I met with a male executive coach. So did some personality assessments, and no surprise, I'm a very strong type A. I am so red that it's burgundy. So when I walk into a room, I walk in with a force. And so he said, let's do away with the slacks. Let's do dresses and, you know, pearls and earrings. And so in my mind, I was offended. I'm like, it doesn't matter what I look like. I know the information. I'm smart. I'm able to present it. I'm just there to do my job. I need to be respected for the work that I do. And we had a very candid conversation about that people see you before they hear you. And I sometimes regret the fact that I have to even verbalize that or say it, but that's the first thing people see. You submit a resume with spelling errors on it. That's the first reflection of you that people see. And so it's being aware of that and keeping that in mind. For me, on the work-life balance piece, the piece that I think is important is that knowing who you are piece when it comes to being okay with not being there for everything. Because sometimes we lie to ourselves. So we tell our kids, I'll be there all day Saturday and you're my only focus. But we know there's work that we're gonna have on Friday that won't get done, and so we're gonna take it home. And so it's having that honest conversation with ourselves first, and knowing our truth to say, I cannot give my entire weekend to my family, but I know they can have that a certain day. So it's, you know, just working through that.
Thank you. Let's talk now about the role that mentors have played in your leadership journey. Georgia, would you like to start our conversation on this?
Sure. So mentoring and the mentorship process is something that I'm very passionate about, because mentors are the reason why I'm here in this role and in this position. I have had male and female mentors, and I've had mentees that have helped to build Georgia to where Georgia is today. And the reason why I think it is important is those are the individuals who either give you a peek into the window as to where you want to be, or the people who are in the room who can mention your name or tell you the conversations that are happening in that room that you currently don't have access to, because there are unwritten rules to every game, to every situation. And those are people who have either gone through experiences where they can tell you, that's not necessarily the way that I would present that. I would present it like this, because the last time I met with this person, this is how they handled that. Or when someone else presented this, you know, proposal to them, it didn't go very well, so I would position it a different way. And, you know, sometimes people look at mentoring or mentorship as this formal structure where you have to have this scheduled 1-hour meeting, et cetera. In terms of building that relationship. For me, the mentorship piece is more the genuine conversations, the call you on your stuff opportunities. And it is important to have different types, because it depends on where you are in your career or in your development. So if you're, you know, an undergrad in school, you know, you want to become a principal, et cetera. You want to become a superintendent. Try to align with individuals that are in that circle, because they will help you to avoid the steps that you may take, which may be additional steps that you don't need to. For me, this role was not something that I necessarily envisioned working with the department. But in building relationships with people who have, you know, been put in administrator roles or senior executive roles in government, there are things that I have been guided and told and have been inspired to look at or take on, including my doctorate, from people who have gone through the journey, or people who have said, yes, you might want to go and do this type of certification, but that's not what's really going to get you to where you want to go. Here is the group that you need to be a part of. Why not go off and get your doctorate on this if this is the end result that you want to get to? So I think it's just important to build those relationships and be really intentional about understanding where you are now and where you want to go, and thinking about people who can help you to bridge that gap, because they can save you years in time in terms of getting to that end result. Because if I didn't have those relationships, or people mentioning my names in naming rooms that I am now in, but I wasn't in at that time, I would not be where I am today.
Cheryl or Melissa? Thank you, Georgia.
Thank you, Georgia. Just building off of what Georgia was sharing, I think access to female networks, and I know on an educational administrative role, there are female networks in the area of women's leadership. And so go to a women's breakfast that AXA sponsors, go to a conference that is about women. And it's nice because they even are including now self-care type sessions as well. So as Georgia said, you know, you never know who's going to become an advocate for you in the future. Just talking to these panelists today, I am just feeling a kindred spirit and like-mindedness that is exciting, and that I want to continue a conversation. So take advantage of that. In addition, peers and job alikes. You know, during this pandemic, for example, you know, other superintendents in the area, we have a group text going, and mentors can be men as well. And that they, you know, I had a personnel issue, and I, earlier in the last year, and I called another superintendent that I really respect, who is male, and I said, you know, this is my situation. This is what I'm thinking, you know, what am I missing? What am I missing here? What advice do you have? How would you handle this? How would you navigate this issue with your board? And I came out of the whole situation unscathed, because I reached out. Don't be afraid to reach out to other women or peers in the same role as you to discuss and problem solve. I actively make myself available to USC, people in USC programs. If they have a request for an interview, I will grant that request. If it's something that I have something to add to or contribute towards. I do take time to do that because I believe in paying it forward and paying back. Taking advantage of opportunities like that.
Yeah, I will just add to and reinforce everything that Georgia and Melissa have said. There's no way I would be in this role without my mentors. And I've had some incredible female mentors and you learn something different from each one of them. But I want to reinforce the thing that mentors sometimes see things in us that we don't see in ourselves. And they push us and they encourage us. And on the other side of that, they also can give us that honest feedback. I call it stinking thinking. You know, they're the ones that can call us out and say, you're not thinking about this right, you know, or you're not thinking about yourself right. So I think those folks that you can trust who will give you that brutally honest feedback and push you when you need it. I've just had some great role models, and again, have lots of different mentors because you learn different things from different mentors, both male and female.
Thank you all. I'd like to remind our participants today to add your questions to the Q&A, and then we will address those during our discussion. I'd like to start our Q&A. First, I'd like to thank our panel for their very heartfelt comments. I think that as women leaders, we really do need to listen to each other and to really grow as women leaders in the work that we do and be open and honest about how we're doing that work. I think that reflection piece is really significant. So thank you for all your comments. I'd like to start with our questions with Dr. Steele. It says, thank you for your insight. As a woman of color in leadership, what advice will you offer to women of color who aspire to move up the leadership ranks?
So it depends on where you are in terms of what type of organization, getting an understanding of the politics of that organization. So hard work, of course, I think that I don't need to go into detail on that. The work has to be there. The work product has to be there. But I think, and I don't want to look at it as a strike or strikes against you, but I think there is an assumption that we have to work harder as females. And then on top of that, as a woman of color, I think that adds an additional level where we feel like we have more to prove. Bring your authentic self to what you do, because I think authenticity gives you the opportunity to give 110% of who you are and what you bring to the table. So you can see behind me, there's, you know, this canvas of a beautiful Black woman. 15 years ago, I would have never had that in my office because I didn't feel like that was something that, you know, I could genuinely display and feel comfortable with. But I've gotten to a point in my career where I realized if I am not able to bring all of me to work, why am I there? So the opportunities will come with the hard work, with understanding and navigating the politics of the office. And so it may be having a conversation with your boss or your boss's boss about what are the things that you need to do, what kind of training they can provide, or what kind of training do you need to go after in order to get to that next level, and be intentional with those conversations. I believe that my commissioner, who I reported, is on here, and I'm pretty sure he could share. I have no problem coming and negotiating my salary or if I'm asking for a promotion, but I've done the work to do that. Meaning I've done the research, I've studied, I've looked at books that talk about how to negotiate your compensation or how to have that conversation about a promotion. So I'm not shy about that anymore, but it's understanding where you may have a gap and then asking the questions and being intentional about those questions to make sure you're getting what it is that you want to accomplish.
Thank you. Our next question for our panel. What do you do when someone tells you to dial it down? How did you handle it in the moment?
I'll start by saying, 30 years ago, somebody told me I was too emotional to be a manager. And so one piece of advice I would have for you is, and this is what Georgia said, you got to be who you are. Now, yes, you have to learn to manage that emotion. I will tell you that having a poker face is something that can be learned. And I've had to learn that, especially since I've been attending board meetings, for the past 12 years. So you can manage your emotions, but don't try to be somebody that you're not. Use your empathy, use your ability to connect to people. If those are strengths for you because you are a passionate, emotional person, then don't apologize for that. You absolutely have to be who you are, but you have to learn to manage it along the way. And as has been said, what's appropriate for the situation? Some of the biggest mistakes I've made, either in a public setting or even in meetings or private settings, is losing my temper. So that is, again, that's a skill and a self-discipline that can be practiced and learned. So be passionate, be who you are, but develop the self-discipline and the emotional management skills that you need to not let that trip you up in your career or in your performance.
Yeah, I'd like to build off of what Cheryl said. It is hurtful when you first hear that. And it's funny, when I first heard it, it was a male who shared, that I was just being too much, a little too loud. And actually, probably for the moment I was getting animated. I think the volume of my voice went up. And so as hurtful as it may have been in that moment, it helped me recalibrate myself to think about consciously, who is my audience? Who is my audience? And once again, wanting to get my recommendation or our vision or our work validated, affirmed, and continue the positive momentum moving forward as an organization. So you do get to know who your board members are, who your administrative team is, and I will be my more authentic self with my cabinet team, and I'll expand that to maybe a few more principals. Certainly my family knows me in that way, but you have to know, who am I speaking to and what is the goal behind this? So just be explicit in that way. And as that individual who told me this was somebody who reached out recently and sent me an email and said, hey, thinking of you, how are you doing and holding up under all of this? And I called that gentleman, who is a retired superintendent, and we had a wonderful conversation for 30 minutes, and he built me up and filled me up and cheerleaded me to get through the week. And it was an amazing conversation. So realize that sometimes something said like that, although hurtful, is said with love and with being a champion to try and get you to rise and take that next step. And it was valuable information and feedback for me. And I know my team knows that all my feedback is not only positive, affirming, rah, rah, but they will get next steps. What is your next step so you can go further?
Thank you. So now we have a question that looks at how do you advise to move forward when your female supervisor is threatened by you? What are 2 things that you would have done differently in climbing up the ladder in your career? And 1 thing you would have told your younger self? So.
Oh, that's a mouthful. So I've had the situation with the female boss who feels threatened. Your work will speak for itself. That's one. But another piece is be strategic in how you incorporate that person into your successes. So everyone has a way that they like to be appreciated. And so one of the things that I did, and I pray she's not watching this right now, whenever I did something, whenever there was a program that launched, et cetera, I made that person out. I put them out in front of it. They were the person who, you know, they were on the news, they were in the paper, et cetera. But internally, everyone knew who really did the work. And sometimes you have to do that, because at the end of the day, you can actually speak to how the success happened. That person can speak to getting the accolades for it, but you know what work that is. So for me, it was being the person in the background, knowing that I did the work, but still being able to have it on my resume to say I actually did the work and I can speak to it because Georgia actually did it. So sometimes you have to kind of do the grunt work in order to have the experience to move on. I always tell people to be open and okay with their truth, to live their truth. But a part of that too is that some of these experiences are required. So even though this may be a difficult supervisor that you're dealing with, this may be polishing for you. And I think it's important to be centered, and if it is God, a higher purpose, your higher self, whatever it is, aligning and understanding what the purpose is of this moment that you're experiencing. Because sometimes we run away from things and then go into something that's even worse because we are supposed to have that experience. So I think it's taking the time to understand what that moment or what that experience is supposed to mean. The other piece of the question was on two things I would have told my younger self. I would have invested in building a mentoring relationship a long time ago. I didn't do that until I was probably a supervisor in my second agency, and I should have invested in that long before that period. So if you're undergrad, graduate, et cetera, and you don't have a mentor, you need to get one. It is so important because that helps you in ways that there's no way any of us that are on this panel could even explain to you. It is so important to have someone who can invest in you, and it's not just family, because family will tell you the greatest things. Oh, hoorah, yeah. You need someone who's going to say, no, this isn't going to work. This is why it's not going to work. And here's what you need to do. And they can help you to skip some of those steps that, you know, you would have thought would be appropriate to take. And they're thinking, you know, that's not what you need to do. Here's the alternative version of what that step needs to be. I think the second thing is be okay with who you are. Know who you are and be okay with who you are, because sometimes we allow the world to mold us, or what the world expects from us to be how we define ourselves. And you need to be able to define you and define your success for yourself.
And I just want to add, it's come up several times. I think advice to our younger selves is be confident and look at your accomplishments. I mean, be realistic about what you can do and what skill set you bring to the table. But try to recognize that and recognize the value that you bring to an organization and to different situations. And if you need to use your mentors and your network to help you recognize that, it's okay to do that and to remind yourself of what you are capable of. And I want to repeat something I said earlier. You are never 100% ready for the next job. I mean, everything that you do that's a new role is going to be a stretch initially. But have confidence that you can learn it. Yes, you'll make some mistakes, so just learn from those mistakes and dive in and start learning about what it takes to succeed in that role.
I'd like to ask our panel now to offer some advice on how to set personal boundaries with a colleague or supervisor while maintaining the professional relationship between yourselves.
So that question sounds a tad loaded. I'm not sure any of us really know how to answer that. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I feel like there's a piece of that we seem to be missing. But if it is a relationship that is dangerously getting close to harassment, I would certainly have a conversation with your HR person about how to deal with that. Because it sounds like there is a piece there that's not in the question that we would probably need some context on. I mean, I have a personable relationship with all of my managers. I still have great relationships with everyone that I've worked with, male and female. So I think there is a building of a relationship that comes from a supervisor subordinate, relationship, but there's also a line that should not be crossed. And so if that person is feeling as if that is being crossed, then that's a conversation they need to have with their HR, or their HR team members.
I think just to build on that, I'm gonna go along the lines of perhaps the workday is over and this manager keeps peppering the person with work-related things on the weekends or late into the evening or whatnot. So I think you need to try to set boundaries. So for example, I talk to some superintendents and they say their boards call them, at all hours of the night and all of this. We've worked with kind of some ground rules about what our protocols are on how I'm going to work with my school board and how they're going to work with me and what that relationship looks like. So unless it's an emergency, I don't get things from my school board because we have established those types of boundaries. And I know that if somebody is reaching out to me on a weekend or in the evening even, that it's something that's very, very important or an emergency. So I think with your manager, it might need to be, if someone is encroaching on maybe family time, because we do want to strive for work balance, try to hearken back to maybe them saying, oh, it's a time for self-care. We want you to have a balanced life, and just say, oh, hey, Mary, I know we talked about having a balance. Well, for me, that really looks like having time with my kids in the evening. I notice you are sending a text or an email at that time of night. Is it okay if I get to that in the morning? Because I am trying to continue to strive for that balance. And just, ask an inquiring question in a respectful manner. But I agree with Georgia. I too went to that. Call HR.
But Melissa, so I had a staff member that had to bring that to my attention because I am intentional about making sure that when I hire individuals to work for me directly, that their spouse or family understands that there may be times that they, have to work late, etc. But I want to make sure they're comfortable with that. But I will get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and start sending emails. And one of my direct reports said, you have a tendency of sending emails really early in the morning. And I usually have my phone in my room. So he's like, now I've taken it and moved it into the dining room. Of course, I'm not thinking about it. But when he said that to me, I said, well, I want the emails to go out, but they don't have to go out at 3 a.m. And so what I did is I set them to start sending at 8. So I've done my part by sending the emails or communications, et cetera, because sometimes you can't get through your entire day and get to all your emails. And so I used to get up early in the morning and just knock emails out. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm done. My inbox is clear, but now I'm pinging in someone's ear when they're supposed to be sleeping. So if that is the situation, it's as simple as a quick conversation just to say, this is usually my time for this. If we wanted to talk, could we look at, doing it at a later time or something like that? I think that could help.
I would just add, not knowing again what the question quite is referring to, that also be aware that sometimes you have friendships, and as you move up, people that were your peers and or your friends are now going to be your subordinates. And so you really need to think through that and think how it's going to impact the relationship. And sometimes those friendships have to end, not because you want them to, but because people will try to take advantage of the friendship to influence a decision that you need to make, and expect you to do exactly what they're asking you to do. And then, they could get mad or feel like you're not listening to them. So that's something that you have to kind of think through in your mind and make some decisions about, quite frankly. Is the friendship more important than what I need to do in this role? And are they really a friend if they are expecting me to respond to every little request that they have, or get mad if I don't do exactly what they say?
Thank you. We had a question in reference to salary negotiations. So I think, and you could speak a little just in terms of, and I know Georgia said something earlier about this, but how do you speak up for yourself as a professional and as a woman leader?
So one of the ways that I go about it is I go in with a list of things that I've accomplished over that year, 2-year period, etc., and set up a meeting, make sure it's titled to say that's what the conversation will be about, and I speak to those points. One of the things that I do is, and I probably shouldn't be saying this because again, I know that he is more than likely on this webinar, is I start high. So I have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. So plan A is I go in and ask for this amount, just the amount, and that's it. And I say, well, here's what I've brought to the table. Here are the things that I've accomplished. We are the #1 state for doing this. We're the first state to do this, etc. And I say, you know, here's a compensation that I'd like to discuss. That usually is not where, you know, it's settled. And so I have a B, which is maybe a combination of an actual salary increase or a promotion of a new title or expanded role, and some type of training, which is usually where it meets, because that training, that investment helps the organization, and I can speak to what that training will do to help the organization, as well as it also benefits me, because not to say I'm, you know, leaving the organization and, you know, anytime soon, regardless of where I'm working. But when you think about it, that's an investment in you as well. So the organization is saying, we believe in you and we know you can do more. So we're making this investment and we'll do that. But it's also a benefit for you because that's something else on your resume. So that's a balance. Now, if it is a flat out no for the combination in terms of for the finances, then you, one may need to think about it a little bit more, or say, well, can we look at getting this training, and after 6 months of getting the training, can we come back and have another conversation? And the reason why I say have those 3 options is you may not know what else is going on in the organization financially. It may not be a position or the right time to do a salary increase, or there may be something that you're missing in order to, you know, get to that next level. But it's about opening the doors for the conversation. And if you're not comfortable talking through it with that person first, have a trusted advisor, a mentor, who you can talk to about what it is that you'd like to see, and they can give you points or pointers about how to, you know, kind of navigate that situation with your boss. It really depends on the personality and how best to approach it. I thought I was a great negotiator, but I will tell you that my boss, our commissioner, he is much better at it than I am. So I didn't go in and get the, you know, option A that I wanted. We did some back and forth on that, but just having a plan and being able to say, well, if it doesn't work out exactly like I would like it, what is the plan B? And being okay with that.
Yeah, I'd like to build on what Georgia's saying. Never go in with one absolute. That's what you have to have. You need to have a menu, right? And from that, you have to have a feeling of what can I live with, right? So it's a little challenging when you're dealing with the board, only because you've got 5 individuals and all of them have their own agendas, for example. So I was really proud of myself because I finished year 5, and now I had salary steps that were built in, and now I'm on my last salary step. And I know if you look at the superintendency and you look at the accomplishments of what has been achieved in our school district, I could go somewhere else and earn a more bottom line salary, right? So I went in, and I too, like Georgia, started with the accomplishments. I actually brought in over a 5-year period what accomplishments had collectively been, you know, achieved through, of course, the work of our team, right? It's never about my work. It's about our team and our collective work, always, always, always. And so, you know, the board was extremely pleased with my performance. And so I basically said, love to stay, but I'm now on year 5. And I said I would like to discuss, you know, options to give me an incentive to stay. And so what we settled on was a 5-year incentive where I will be getting a percentage of my salary that will be going towards a TSA. And so it goes collectively up and builds every year for the next 5 years. And I absolutely adore this community, love the people that I'm working with. Clearly, I'm a loyal person based on my history and my experience. Believe in what we're doing and that we're making a difference. And so I went in and I came out with a 5-year deal, and I'm very satisfied with that. So I feel very good about that. Also in the superintendency, and I don't know if this is true in higher ed, Cheryl, but you can go online and see what any superintendent makes in California. So you need to look in your collective area because it changes by region. And so, you know, I am being fairly compensated with my salary, but it did, I was really proud of myself. And I have shared my coaching up on this topic with other female superintendents. So.
Just 2 quick items to add. One, as you've heard, do your homework. And if you work for a public agency, usually there are websites. I know Transparent California has every public agency and higher ed salary. And so do your homework and know what other people are making. And secondly, the higher you go, the more protection you need. So don't just think about salary and benefits, but think about what happens if you are asked to leave, or if the politics suddenly turn against you, or you have new board members who don't want you there anymore. So look at your contract in terms of what protection you have, either to you know, have some sort of guaranteed income if you are asked to leave for a certain period of time. In California, under the Ed Code, you know, we can request 18 months. And so I make sure that that's built into my contract. Or if you want a clause in there of the, you can retreat to faculty. My point is, make sure that you have some way of protecting yourself financially and in your career if things suddenly go, you know, go wrong.
Thank you. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Melissa, Cheryl, and Georgia today for some very honest and heartfelt conversation that I think will really support us as women leaders to reflect on our own practice and to build our craft. So with that, I want to thank you and turn our program back over to Matt.
Thank you, Mary, for moderating today's discussion. And thank you, Cheryl, Melissa, and Georgia for participating in this important conversation and for sharing valuable tips and advice for women navigating the ascent to leadership positions. As I mentioned earlier, a recording of today's webinar will be sent out in the next few days. And when you close out of today's session, a short survey will appear. Please take a moment to provide feedback on today's webinar and share your ideas for future virtual programs. Don't forget to tag us on social media using the hashtag #RossierLeads. Thank you all for attending, and we hope you attend a future Leadership Month session. Have a great day and fight on.